It's not often the entire gang, as it were, gets together at 221B Baker Street. However, on the morning of Friday the 20th of April, 1900, precisely that happened. With breakfast tea, Mrs. Hudson's famous tarts, and small talk, with Holmes puffing away on his pipe and Watson engrossed in the Times. Such gatherings, though few and far between, make for a most enjoyable start of the day.
"They're still talking about that second death by plague,"
comments Watson as he flips the newspaper page.
"They better get on it. Last thing old London needs is a serious outbreak of infection."
"I'm afraid the city is growing faster than nature approves, old boy," Holmes replies, punctuating his comment with a plume of smoke. Our pleasant morning conversation continues for over an hour, until disrupted by a shrill ring on the far side of the room. Some day I will make an official inquiry as to the utmost rude nature of technology. With urgency, Holmes takes up the candlestick phone, nodding and grunting, saying no more than, "I see," and "right away," before finally hanging up. Instantly we recognize the look on Holmes's face. Wiggins is already up out of his seat. "All right, lads. Looks like you need to get down to Irongate Wharf, right off."
"Murder?"
Wiggins inquires, slipping into his coat. Unknown at this point. Turning to Watson, Holmes takes the pipe from his mouth. "You'd better accompany them, Watson. I have a feeling they'll need your expertise." Watson blushes, rising to his feet and mumbling,
"Well, expert. I don't know about all that, Holmes. A learned man, an experienced man, perhaps.
Holmes barks, "Not now, Watson. The docks are a ways off, and you may need every moment." In a commotion, we fumble for our things and rush out of the office of the greatest detective in London. In a short time, we find ourselves at the water's edge on Irongate Wharf. Expecting to find the usual police presence quarantining a crime, we see nothing but a familiar red-bearded figure waiting in the drizzle.
"Inspector," Watson hollers as we approach. "What is this all about? Holmes made it sound like there was a crime afoot."
The Metropolitan Police's first inspector of the Thames Division, Archibald Cray, only grimaces and shakes his head. He then proceeds to pull forth a brass whistle and gives it a sequence of 3 blows. Turning to us, he returns his whistle to an inner pocket of his familiar long coat, adorned with military decorations from his time as a soldier.
"Gentlemen, you'll need a handkerchief or such."
At that very moment, a police steamer glides out of the fog behind the inspector. Slowly it drifts and turns sideways, bumping lightly against the wharf, presenting itself for boarding. Cray steps on first, of course, and we follow, too curious for small talk. Pushing out onto the water, we chug under the Tower Bridge and arrive at the middle of the Thames, where 2 additional police boats bob alongside a small fishing barge. Cray hops on the barge first, taking out his own handkerchief and covering his mouth and nose.
"Gentlemen, out of an abundance of caution, I urge you to touch as little as possible."
One by one, we hop from boat to boat and cover our faces with fabric as the inspector instructs. We are led to the wheelhouse of a meagre vessel, a chamber just large enough for the addition of a small table with bench seating. 4 settings of food and drink spread across the table. Supper by the looks of it, though it's a bit hard to see, for sure, with the bodies in the way. 3 adult men and a younger adolescent, to be exact, each slumped, lifeless, onto the table. As Wiggins reaches for the handle to the wheelhouse door, which is set with a large glass pane, Watson reaches up and grabs him.
"Hold on, lad. The blackened fingers and noses and discolored lesions, I'd recognize that skim hemorrhaging anywhere."
Cray steps up behind both men and nods.
"We're not yet positive, gentlemen, but we suspect plague. The 3rd case of Red Death in as many weeks, it would seem."
The inspector uses another cloth to open the door. Closer visual inspection reveals the horrific scene in clear detail. The 4 victims have large swatches of oozing pustules and even the occasional bloody rupture.
"Leave the door open if you will, Inspector," says Watson. "This is indeed plague."
Holding the door open with his foot, the inspector unintentionally lowers his facial protection, revealing a mouth agape with surprise.
"You're sure of it? So soon?"
Watson nods.
"Certain."
The 4 men at the table show every indication of sitting down at the start of a fine fisherman's dinner. There are no signs of struggle, no signs of alarm. It's as if the 4 men simply keeled over and died instantly of disease. Wiggins looks back to Cray. "All 4 men work this barge?"
"The older gent and the lad are father and son, Donald and Max Colgate, owners of the boat. As best we gather, the dark-skinned fellow is the ship's first mate, Wilson Jones. The last lad, a hired hand, Kelly Denver, waiting for final confirmation, but I suspect it will be clear."
With nothing else to note, we all exit the wheelhouse, closing the door behind us. As we move to step back towards the rail of the boat and the relief of the open water of the Thames, a distant crunch is heard under Watson's foot. Wiggins drops down and spies a number of shards of glass, the bulk of them right next to the wheelhouse doorframe. Wiggins rises with a sigh of curiosity. "Oi, Inspector," one of the bobbies now aboard the fisherman's vessel calls out. Shining his lantern over the side of the boat, he reaches down and comes up with a piece of flat driftwood. He hands it to us. "What do you make of this?" Wiggins holds the plank as Watson runs his finger along the centermost portion, which appears dry and charred. The top of his finger comes up a deep scarlet.
"Burned, in some sort of dye or dark chemical. Not likely anything to do with plague."
Turning his attention away from the wood and towards Inspector Cray, Watson asks,
"Now tell us, Inspector, why did you ring up Holmes for a case of disease as such? After all, Mother Nature doesn't play favourites."
He chuckles as if content with his own cleverness.
"Not like you can bring her up on charges."
Grasping his hands behind his back, Cray turns and sets a foot against the bottom rope rail of the fishing boat.
"Because we have a witness, gentlemen."
"A witness?"
Wiggins asks with his face contorted in confusion.
"A witness to what? Someone survived this ordeal?"
"Well, no," the inspector fidgets in clear discomfort. "The witness was on the dock. He swears a red fog rolled in across the water, well, that a man appeared out of the mist, boarded the fishing boat, and then entered the wheelhouse, all just before the men dropped dead, as near as we can tell."
Watson paces a bit, trying to absorb the scene and Cray's information. As he is the only one present who has a medical background, we wait in silence.
"Inspector, these men have been dead for some time, and the meal is certainly not breakfast. If there was a witness, why are you just getting to the scene now?"
"I said there was a witness. I didn't say he's a particularly reliable one. I believe alcohol had an influence on the timing of his report." Pausing before the inspector, Watson looks back to the wheelhouse.
"I just don't see it. It doesn't add up, Inspector."
Motioning back to the police boat, the inspector chews on his lip. "I shouldn't have summoned you. I don't know what I was thinking. Of course, if it's plague, as you say, it must be natural causes. Thank you, gentlemen. We'll take you back to shore." Back aboard the police vessel, one of the officers steps before Officer Cray.
"Move the bodies to parts, then, Inspector?"
Before the inspector has a chance to respond, another nearby officer calls out,
"Can't have just anybody move plague bodies. Needs a double-sealed casket and a specialist in the matter, Victor Wakely."
Cray adjusts his hat as he moves to the starboard side of the boat. "Wakely doesn't service this far upriver. We have to contact Alan Tacker. He'll come to prepare the bodies properly for burial." As we make our way back to Irongate, Watson leans against the rail of the boat, brooding, until just feet from the wharf. He snaps to life.
"Inspector, the witness's name?"
Without turning to face Watson, the inspector answers, "Fletcher Clinton, a local fisherman."
"It would seem to me that we should proceed at least with an initial investigation, Inspector. After all, if there's nothing sinister involved, all that's wasted is a bit of time."
"Well, I certainly don't mean to waste anyone's time, gentlemen, but I'm all for being thorough. I'll leave it to your discretion, then." With a salute from Cray, we depart the police boat and make our way off the wharf.
"Lads, the inspector's probably right. This whole affair is likely a wild-goose chase," says Watson. "But I know it's been a few days since you were on a case."
"We're happy to take a crack at it, Watson, if you think there's something worth looking at."
"Something just isn't adding up, and I have a hunch the inspector seemed to feel the same, but was too embarrassed to say it forthright. In any case, I suspect you meet with an old friend of mine, Mr. Hamilton Potts. Potts is one of London's leading expert in disease, and if anyone can smell a rat in all this business, count on Potts."
Recognizing us, the desk officer directs us to a nearby bench and bids us have a seat. In a few minutes, a very young man appears with an armful of paperwork. He introduces himself as Constable Hammett and leads us into a quiet conference room away from the bustle of the front desk.
If you'll pardon my saying, gentlemen, I'm quite excited to have been put on this case. I hope my diligence is of help.
Wiggins nods with a slight smile.
Not much of a case yet, lad, but maybe after we see what we've got. Who knows?
Constable Hammett proceeds to lay out his papers across the top of a metal desk, his manner precise and highly organized.
The 4 victims on the barge have no criminal records, not so much as a single complaint against them.
Not much of a start. Laying down another set of papers over the first, the young man continues.
Neither did the earlier 2 victims, David Harris, date of death Tuesday, April 10th, and 2 days later, Patricia Cooper, date of death Thursday, April 12th.
Pausing, Constable Hammett steps to the side, allowing us to get a good look at the reports. Neither reveal any signs of foul play, and both record the cause of death as natural, having been verified as septicemic plague. Hammett adds a new row of papers to the desktop.
Cray asked us to cast a wide net and call up anything related to disease. The only other thing I found, which admittedly has little relevance, is the body dealer, Dr. Victor Wakely. Apparently a number of Wakely's critically ill elderly patients filed grievances of missing valuables from their homes. Wakely was never arrested, and the issue never went before the courts, though I suspect the latter was only because nearly all the claimants died from their illnesses. One patient who did not die apparently settled with Wakely for a sizable sum.
Wiggins retrieves his journal and begins taking notes as Constable Hammett refers to another document.
There was also Percival Bailey, another doctor who specializes in disease. Again, I assume this is far removed from the case at hand, but Cray said to look at anything. In this case, Dr. Bailey has a history of violence, most recently a tavern brawl which was dismissed by the court with a probationary warning, and then a charge of assaulting a police officer. The latter charge was reduced to service to the city on account of his medical speciality and experience, though personally I suspect if he has another serious infraction, his career will be in jeopardy.
Most thorough, lad, most thorough,
muses Wiggins. Constable Hammett leans back with a look of pride on his face.
Inspector Cray has us searching for an expert in chemistry. He thought it prudent to find someone to aid you in your investigation. Unfortunately, we're having a spot of trouble finding someone with the proper credentials. Bad timing, I guess, with that big medical get-together in Vienna. It seems that many experts in the field are currently attending. In any case, Scotland Yard is on top of it. In a city the size of London, it shouldn't take much longer.
Taking a final look through the papers, we collect our things and thank Constable Hammett for his time and attention.
"Oh, gentlemen,"
he calls out just as we're about to exit the room.
"I nearly forgot. We just picked up a gentleman, Will Cotton. Mr. Cotton accosted a dock worker, not far off from today's regrettable discovery. We were going to send a detective over to Mr. Cotton's home, but I don't see why you two couldn't undertake the task. That is, of course, as long as you report back your findings to Scotland Yard."
At our approach to the familiar side entrance of Bart's hospital, we find a coach unloading a body into the care of a young member of the medical staff. Looking to us through foggy spectacles, the lad motions for the driver to hold and approaches.
"Mr. Wiggins, isn't it?"
Wiggins nods.
"Thomas said you might be stopping by."
He pauses to remove his glasses and wipe them with the bottom of his shirt.
"You missed him by a stretch. He went off to St. John's Church. Something about a group of deceased plague victims."
"Say no more,"
Wiggins blurts out with a tip of his hat. We turn and depart with haste. We enter Holmes's office to find him sitting on the edge of his desk, smoking a pipe. A section of the desk has been cleared, and a small pile of dominoes sits within arm's reach. "Ah, lads, how is your trip to the Thames? Is it a case, or are London's finest sending us around in circles once again?" Holmes reaches down and sets one of the dominoes on its end, then knocks it over with a flick of his finger. He repeats the process with another domino, setting one single domino just ahead of the last piece.
"To be honest, we're not quite sure yet, Holmes. Watson immediately confirmed a case of plague. The entire thing is a bit puzzling, but everything points to a natural cause of death."
"Does it now?" inquires Holmes as he continues setting up dominoes one by one, knocking them each over in turn as soon as it's set.
"All right, Holmes, I'll bite. What the bloody hell are you doing? You got to set them in a row together if you want them to knock each other over."
Puffs on his calabash pipe and narrows his eyes. "Fascinating, isn't it? If I set them individually in the exact proper position, nothing happens. It's only when they're all set in their respective positions at the same time that the effect you allude to takes place." He turns to face us abruptly. "Gentlemen, I urge you to continue with this investigation. I think you'll find something most nefarious afoot." Sliding off his desk, our mentor and employer walks across the room to one of the bookcases. Puffing on his pipe, he reviews the numerous tomes, apparently looking for something in particular. "If you decide to take up this line of work in a professional capacity after our time together, you'll certainly find that some cases are more complex than others, and that the object of desire is not always what it appears to be. In this instance, gentlemen, I stress that the motives to the crime you now investigate are quite obfuscated. Do not be discouraged, and remember that investigative failure is an illusion. It is just as important to learn what is not as what is. Don't forget, lads, a good detective is never prideful. You have a network of help at your disposal. If you need it, take advantage of it." Holmes withdraws a book. "Ah, here it is. Major Conflicts of the English Empire." He then turns and returns to his desk. "Oh, one more thing," he exclaims, taking the pipe from his mouth and setting it on his desk holder. "I've heard that Scotland Yard has taken up one Will Cotton. If your investigation has grown stagnant, I suggest you refocus your efforts there. I suspect he will be illuminating, if not puzzling." A contemplative look breaks across Wiggins's face as he prepares to press Holmes further, but before he can get another word in, Sherlock leaps from his desk. "Good gracious, I nearly forgot. I promised to retrieve a parcel for my brother Mycroft. If you'll excuse me, gentlemen, if I don't get to the postal service before it closes, I'll never hear the end of it."
Arriving at 5 Gossett Street, we're greeted by an elderly woman whose eyes are red with grief.
"We've already spoken to the police and been checked over by 3 different doctors. Please, let us be."
Wiggins removes his hat and brings it tight to his chest.
"I'm quite sorry for your loss, Mrs. Colgate, but we're not medical men or from the police. We work with Sherlock Holmes, assisting Scotland Yard in certain matters." "Scotland Yard?" the woman mules. "What do they have to do with my boy and grandson falling ill?"
After spreading on the butter extra thick, we learn the woman is the fishing barge owner's mother, Clara Colgate. She lets us in to have words with her and the only other surviving member of the household, Mr. Colgate's wife, Margaret. We convene in the common room of the small home, where Clara picks up where we left off.
"I just don't understand why any police or detectives are involved where our boys fell ill with plague. Since when is that a matter of the law?"
Clearly the women have nothing to do with any crime. Their grief lies as sincere and apparent as their loss. Wiggins struggles to keep eye contact, trying to assess the truth of their words, while not wanting to insult them further with a confrontational manner.
"Well, ladies, the fact of the matter is your boys did die of plague, but there are some questions as to the nature of how they contracted the disease."
Wiggins pauses and twists his hat in both hands before continuing.
"We really don't have anything solid to go on. We're trying to be most thorough. To be sure, Mr. Colgate and his son weren't deliberately put into a risky situation where the contraction of the disease was, shall we say, a foregone conclusion."
The women's eyes turn wide as saucers.
Who would do such a thing?"
"'Tis our question to you, I'm afraid." The mother shakes her head while Mrs. Colgate drops hers down in grief.
"Was there no one who had ill will towards your family?"
Wiggins asks.
"None at all,"
Mrs. Colgate replies from behind a handkerchief as she dabs her eyes.
"They were fishermen, drawing meagre means, as you can see by the home around you. We offended no one in professional or social circles."
"Any outstanding debts of any kind to one of the major banks, or perhaps a private individual?"
"None,"
both women say simultaneously. Wiggins fumbles over his words, querying about insurance and such, then stops abruptly and rises out of his seat.
No, we won't trouble you any longer. I can see plainly in just these few moments your family has no insight to any wrongdoing, if any wrongdoing should be discovered. Again, we are most sorry for your loss."
We insist the ladies remain seated and see ourselves out. We arrive at 210 Walworth Road, also known as Ward's boarding house, which reveals itself as little more than a flophouse. Not uncommon landside quarters for a man like Mr. Jones, who spends more days of the year away on the water than settling down roots in a family. We ask the clerk at the front desk about Mr. Jones and explain his recent demise.
"The Red Death? Good God, not here!"
The clerk backs up against the wall as if we were robbing him with a firearm. He moves so hastily the shelves above shudder under his impact. The clerk reaches for a key on a rack and throws it at us.
"Here, take it. Number 14.
He follows the key with an empty canvas duffel. Take all of it. All of his belongings to the police. I don't want any of it here. I'll burn whatever you leave." Without a word, we make our way upstairs and enter room 14. The room is transient in nature, with very little personal relation to Mr. Jones. We find little more than old clothes and a few tools of the fisherman's trade: rope, line, fishing hooks, a couple of nets, and a couple of old knives. Wiggins uncovers an old, partially rotted coin sack that contains roughly £3 in various coins. It seems Mr. Jones was a man of the moment, spending his wages on the consumable simple pleasures of London life has to offer. Finding nothing suspicious and nothing that speaks to anything but a natural death, we leave the clerk's bag unfilled and depart the inn to pursue our investigation elsewhere. "172 Cable Street is one of the most depressing areas of modern London, a slum by any other name. But the inhabitants are not refuse of the city, disregarded souls who have given up at life, as many with means would like to believe. No, the inhabitants of Cable Street are London's hard-working poor, people who, despite spending nearly every waking hour grinding their hands to the bone in effort, find themselves unable to escape the tireless beast of poverty that prowls the streets of London. When we arrive at Mr. Denver's flat, we are greeted by a middle-aged woman carrying a newborn on her hip. Her tired, weathered, tarnished face perfectly reflects the environment. But unlike the slum that has no redeeming quality, the woman before us has an inherent beauty, a physical attractiveness that rises above and beyond her surroundings. Before Wiggins can get a word in, 3 other young children rush up behind the woman, clinging to her legs and looking at us with bright, curious eyes.
"Ma'am, we'd like to talk to you about your husband, Mr. Denver."
"Kelly? Well, he's not here, gentlemen. He stayed out on the river all night. I do expect him back any time if you'd like to wait."
And just like that, we encounter the dread of our profession. One of the most difficult aspects of instantly jumping on a new case is that sometimes the trail is so fresh you find yourselves ahead of the police and have the most unfortunate duty of taking up some of their responsibilities.
"Ma'am, perhaps you should convey the youngsters to another room. We have a most serious matter to discuss."
The glassy look in her eyes speaks to the realization of a wife married into a dangerous profession. After the kids are ushered out of sight, we break the news to Mrs. Denver as gently as possible. Her manner is surprisingly numb. A broken doll can only be broken in so many ways.
"I knew something was wrong when he didn't return. He always told me when the work might run long. He was a good man, and despite our finances, a good father to our children. I suppose we need to see a doctor now to get checked. It'll be the rent."
Wiggins places his hand on her shoulder in a show of compassion.
No. The yard will send someone over. There'll be no expense to you. Has anyone been ill?"
She forces a small smile.
"When you have 6 kids, gentlemen, someone is always sick. Ironically, at this moment we're all in fine health."
We proceed to ask Mrs. Denver about the family's finances. We learn they have no savings and live strictly off what Mr. Denver supplied from season to season. However, with no outstanding debts and no sense of desperation, the thoughts of any kind of financial motive to murder evaporates into the ether. With no personal grudges, suspicious activities, or apparent connections to anything associated with plague, Wiggins thanks Mrs. Denver for her time. We give our condolences one last time and show ourselves out. A middle-aged maid answers the door at 39 Bear Lane.
"Afternoon,"
she says with a tiredness a bit beyond her age.
"Dr. Victor Wakely, please."
"If you'll wait in the parlour, gentlemen. He may have left for a spell. I've been in the kitchen cooking, and he doesn't always announce his departures."
Convening in the parlour, we don't bother removing our overcoats, as our impression is that the doctor is not in. However, to our surprise, a few minutes later a thin man with sideburns and a mustache, deepest grey eyes, and a most irritable disposition, at least in appearances, enters. He eyes us carefully before speaking. "Dr. Victor Wakely, gentlemen. Whom do I have the pleasure of calling upon me this afternoon?" After our introductions and brief explanation of the visit, Dr. Wakely takes a seat and looks to us with renewed interest. "Well, I can certainly see why you sought me out. Anything I can do, gentlemen, I am certainly at your service."
"As someone who deals with disease regularly, we assume plague."
Wakely nods. "Indeed, you assume correctly."
"We were hoping you might have some insight into this most peculiar case."
The doctor retrieves a satchel from the floor. Placing it on a small end table, he reaches within and searches around what sounds like a clutter of medical instruments. When at last he emerges with a cigarette case and matches in his hand, Wiggins can't help but take a second closer look at the doctor's hand. Clearing his throat, Wiggins quickly passes a handkerchief to Dr. Wakely.
Sir, your hand.
Without accepting the cloth, Wakely looks to his cigarette case and sees a dozen black ants crawling about his hand. Only then do we all take notice of a small ant infestation crawling out of the bag and onto the floor, where it remained only a moment ago. Dr. Wakely shakes the bugs free of his hand with little fanfare and wipes away the bulk of them on his bag before closing the satchel and laying it down on another part of the floor.
Determined little creatures. I'm afraid they come with the territory of my profession, dealing with bodies in burial grounds and such.
We nod and agree.
Of course.
The doctor makes an offer of a cigarette to each of us, which we both refuse, before taking one himself and lighting up. He listens intently as we describe the scene of the fishing barge in as perfect detail as we can recall. After Wiggins's conclusion, Dr. Wakely takes a long drag on his cigarette, then stands and paces with hands behind his back.
What you describe is most unusual. I mean that quite literally, gentlemen. In all my years, I have never heard of a case of any plague working with such speed.
Twisting his face in disappointment, Wiggins falls back in his chair. Noticing the reaction, Wakely stops and raises a finger.
But that does not mean that such a variety of plague does not exist. Quite the contrary. In modern medicine, we learn better every day that disease is a constantly changing organism. Though terrifying to consider, it is plausible that nature has seen fit to deliver London a new type of plague, something that attacks the system with such ferocity the individual is rendered unconscious before they are aware of the first symptoms. Then the disease moves with such rapidity as to place the victim into coma and eventual demise without ever once regaining consciousness.
Wiggins rubs his chin, considering the doctor's words.
I do appreciate your insight. But it's all speculation. It doesn't give us much of anything tangible to pursue.
Tightening up his lips and brow, Dr. Wakely begins pacing again.
No, it doesn't, does it?
After a slight pause to think, he looks to us intensely as if we ourselves were the objects of inquiry. He then returns to pacing with rapid steps.
There is another possibility, he says.
We both edge forward in our seats, our feeling Dr. Wakely, one of the foremost body dealers, would have actionable insight moments before being validated.
If we remove the plague itself from the equation, is it not possible the men were rendered unconscious before the plague symptoms manifested?
Wiggins's eyes widen, and he nearly jumps out of his seat.
Most excellent, Doctor. If the men were unconscious and remained as such, the disease would have nearly a full day to work against the men.
Recoiling from the doctor in deep and rapid thought, Wiggins blurts out, in an almost insulting fashion, as if Wakely was no longer present,
"But that leads back to square one. What would cause all four men to fall unconscious at the same time, in the middle of sitting down for a meal?"
Dropping the ash of his cigarette into a brass urn, Dr. Wakely grins as if Wiggins's query is something that even a beginning medical student would know.
Of course, a number of agents can quickly render a man unconscious. Ether, chloroform, chloral hydrate, to name a few. But, gentlemen, these are the tools of druggists, not of fishermen. You did say this took place on a fishing barge, no? And here I must urge you that perhaps a doctor who specializes in the principles of chemistry can be more helpful in this regard. My own experience, of course, is the symptomatic study and identification of human biological disorder.
The doctor moves before us, stopping less than an arm's length away.
Now, gentlemen, I in no way intend to tell you your business, but it would seem to me that some sort of industrial compound or mishandled boat material is far more likely the culprit than any medical concoction. As of the former, I have absolutely no knowledge.
He tries to restrain a smile.
I haven't even been on a boat in over a decade, and I couldn't begin to tell you how they operate these days, or what potentially hazardous material might be aboard.
The door at 67 Lehman Street has a paper tacked to it. It reads quite simply, St. John's Church, back by late afternoon. Arriving at 9 King Street, we are greeted by a man in his 60s, small in stature, with thinning gray hair. In a reserved and formal manner, he inquires as to the purpose of our visit.
After introductions, he presents himself as one Dr. Hamilton Potts. His bearing is lukewarm at best, as if welcoming work colleagues into his home as a matter of formality rather than genuine interest. All this changes at the mention of working with Holmes, and in particular Dr. Watson. Potts's manner, although no less formal, abruptly becomes significantly more welcoming. We enter and move to his study, where his desk reveals him to be in the middle of taking wine and cheese. Dr. Potts wastes no time in retrieving 2 additional glasses and motioning us to join him. The doctor sits quietly as we relay the scene of the fishing barge, including Watson's verification of plague. At our conclusion, he refills our glasses. "I'm sure John's assessment of the situation is accurate, but, gentlemen, the whole ordeal makes little sense. Septicemic plague takes days to affect its victim's health. Perhaps, in all my years, I may have come across a single case or 2 that transpired within 24 hours, but never instantaneously." Leaning forward in his chair, Wiggins looks to the doctor with his full attention.
"What makes you say the men died instantaneously?"
"Well, as you describe it, the men were in the middle of an ordinary meal. I find it highly implausible that 4 men with plague would assemble as such. Bear in mind some of the symptoms of plague: fever, chills, weakness of the body, extreme intestinal pain, not to mention the classic necrotic blackened tissue. I just don't see how anyone could sit for a meal under such personal circumstances, never mind among other individuals displaying such symptoms. You're not likely to find a single soul in all of London who isn't fearful of the plague, and most have at least some idea of the most serious signs and symptoms these days." Setting back in his seat, Wiggins adds to the doctor's account.
"I see. So you believe the only possibility is a sudden, instantaneous onset of plague, so rapid the men died before they knew what was happening."
With a shake of his head, the doctor quickly sets his wineglass down and puts a napkin to his mouth. "No, gentlemen. As I say, such occurrences don't make any sense. There's been no record of such plague. Though I suppose it is in the realm of possibility. This is something new. But even then, to have 4 men die so nearly instantaneously as to not alarm the others, it just seems completely impossible."
"I'm afraid solving the impossible is just our line of work, Doctor,"
Wiggins says with a macabre grin of pride.
"We were wondering if another agent might not be involved, a chemical element to accelerate the plague, or perhaps something that mimics the effects of plague."
Rubbing on his chin for a moment, the doctor's eyes wander about the room, deep in thought. "No, I can think of nothing that would accelerate plague in an individual, nor create similar symptoms resulting in instantaneous death. I believe time is your factor here, gentlemen." Dr. Potts leans back in his chair and pulls out a cigar, running it under his nose. "But I must confess, my expertise lies in malady and physical infection. The chemistry days of my schooling are long behind me, and my memory of such things is most certainly inadequate. No, I say you need a proper chemist to assess your enigma. Do you know Mr. George Hall? I can vouch for his expertise, although any of London's fine druggists would offer more help in that regard than myself." We finish Dr. Potts's fine wine, thank him for his time, and depart. "44 Rue Pell Street is a small 3-story home with a single flat on each story. Knowing Mr. Harris isn't present, we knock on the front door and wait for one of the other tenants to answer. A frail-looking older gentleman answers our call after some time.
"I hope you're not here to see Mr. Harris upstairs on the top floor,"
he starts right off.
"Not exactly, sir. We're here on behalf of Scotland Yard to take an assessment of his belongings."
"Ah, the city servants, always behind no matter how many and how high their salary. Mr. Harris's family already took out most everything, I imagine."
The old man steps aside to allow us to enter.
"Curious, old boy. What was Mr. Harris's nature? Was he a pleasant neighbour?"
"I don't see why not," the old man answers with a nod. "He was a bus driver, you know. More of a people person than I. Always liked the small talk, but a bit too fast for my hearing. And a fisherman."
"Any odd friends or suspicious characters ever come to call on him?"
Wiggins asks in a slow, deliberate manner.
"Can't say that I ever noticed much of his friends. David would take time to disappear any chance he got. Went all over on fishing expeditions. Brought me back a prize-winning grayling from Scotland once. Fed me for 2 weeks.
We thank the old-timer for his insights, then proceed upstairs, where we find the door of the top floor unlocked.
True to the neighbor's word, most of the personal effects in the flat have been removed. We find nothing suspicious or out of the ordinary. The last remaining items left behind speak to a man with a true passion for fishing. A few paintings, a number of award plaques for fishing accomplishments, and a number of loose lures and fishing tool pieces. It takes no leap of deductive reasoning to ascertain why Mr. Harris was on the Thames the day of his death. "106 St. George Street is a run-down slum of a house. In our effort to approach the front door, we step over a dank-smelling drunkard sprawled out on the front landing. Though it appears a distinct risk of collapse of the threshold exists, Wiggins risks a few knocks. The only answer comes from behind us.
"Shh! What's with all the racket? Can't you see a man's trying to rest?"
Wiggins raps again.
"We'll be off in a moment, old boy. Just trying to have a quick word with the king of the castle."
Behind us, the man slowly struggles to his feet and turns to us with a flamboyant hand gesture in the air.
"This villain of mine comes under the prediction. There's son against father. The king falls from bias of nature. There's father against child."
Freezing in place with his knuckles against the door, Wiggins slowly turns and looks to the drunkard. We only now notice the fishing pole and small metal bucket resting behind where the man lay just a moment ago.
"Do you mean to tell us, sir, you are one Fletcher Clinton?"
He thinks about it for a moment, then nods vigorously.
"The one and only. Though I never considered myself king, I accept your offer. I'd like my crown to be silver with many green emeralds."
Falling in alongside the gentleman, Wiggins reaches out and takes Mr. Clinton firmly by the shoulder, more of a gesture to keep him from falling over than anything else.
"Perhaps the man would be more useful than the king presently. We were hoping for a direct account of the fishing barge in the Thames."
For a moment, the unfocused, wobbly nature of Mr. Clinton vanishes, replaced by a profuse paleness and wide-eyed look of terror.
"King or pauper, I'd rather not,"
he says, pulling away from Wiggins and nearly losing his balance, instead lowering himself to a seated position on the ground in a single motion.
"It's most important,"
pleads Wiggins.
"You won't believe me anyway, just like those dim-witted bobbies didn't."
Withdrawing his pipe, Wiggins shakes his head in an overdramatic fashion.
No, we're nothing like those unimaginative fellows. We're independent detectives, you see. It's our profession to keep an open mind."
Under a short, abrupt breath of disbelief, Mr. Clinton purses his lips.
"There was a might heavy fog that night, but inconsistent. It was inconsistent. I remember it clearly as I look up from time to time, one moment hardly able to see a single lantern on that fishing trawler, the next seeing the men move about as clear as day. I reckon those lads were so used to it, that's why they didn't take no notice when that unholy red fog, as thick as any fog ever settled on the Thames, rolled across the river, straight towards them."
Striking a match on a broken brick, Wiggins looks to Clinton in a most serious manner.
"Tell me, Mr. Clinton, was the fog moving against the current?"
Thinking for a moment, Mr. Clinton closes his eyes and sits there motionless, as if deep in thought. After a long pause, we realize the bugger has fallen asleep. Wiggins clears his throat, snapping the drunkard awake. He continues without losing his place in the slightest.
"I reckon it cut against the current, but it started upriver of the trawler."
Wiggins nods, encouraging him to continue.
"It rolled against the trawler, and God strike me dead if the Grim Reaper himself didn't float up out of the fog and board that fishing boat. Nearly dropped my pole in the river when I saw him."
Fully entertaining the fantastic story, Wiggins asks,
"And then what, Mr. Clinton? What did the Reaper do after it boarded?" "He walked over and crouched down near the cabin, where the fishermen had already settled in, mind you. He remained out of view for no more than a second, then rose once again and just stood there." "Stood there?" "Stood there, watching the men through the glass of the door. Within a few minutes his form was so overcome with the red fog it was difficult to distinguish him. I'm not quite sure how none of the crew saw him. In any case, after a bit he entered the cabin. It was only a few minutes later, when he exited and shut the door, that he turned in my direction. I swear I felt his unholy eyes fall to my very soul. The chill that ran down my spine, well, I don't claim to be a brave man, but I think any man would have fled as I did in those circumstances.
We arrive at 11 Shaftesbury Avenue and find a well-dressed gentleman moving luggage from inside the house to the street. When we approach, he stops and gives us a heavy look-over and says in a solemn tone, "You two look like respectable gents. Would you watch this luggage for a moment? I have another 2 bags upstairs."
"Not at all. Take your time, old boy,"
Wiggins says, quickly accommodating the chap. In a few minutes' time he returns carrying not 2 but 3 bags and a sack that looks to be filled with clothes or blankets. As the gentleman rummages through his wallet, Wiggins steps up.
"Our condolences on your loss, Mr. Cooper."
The direct address gives the gentleman pause. "Do I know you, sirs?" After our usual introductions, Wiggins goes on to explain the nature of our visit. We learn that the man is one Paul Cooper, Miss Cooper's brother.
"Did she spend much time on the water, Mr. Cooper?"
"She was always fond of boats, ever since we were children," he replies, looking down Shaftesbury Avenue with a glazed look about him. "I can't say how often she took to her leisure pursuits, but any time she took a boat of a particular size or a voyage of an extended time, I was sure to get a post." Intent on getting his sister's things back to their parents' home in Leeds, Cooper speaks only briefly with us. He answers all of Wiggins's questions promptly and with sincerity, the pain wearing on his face evident as the discussion continues. Not finding any avenues worth pursuing, we ask Mr. Cooper for permission to take a look around his sister's home. "As you wish, gentlemen, but you'll do so on your own accord. I'll not stay another hour in this city on the brink of a plague outbreak. London is far too populated, and I fear my sister's passing is a bleak omen of things to come." Upstairs we find nothing out of place or particularly noteworthy. Some of the items left behind indicate Miss Cooper held a fondness of nature in general, from a number of wilderness landscape paintings to a selection of animal ornaments. It would seem Mr. Cooper's sister indeed loved the beauty of the Thames, and as a wealthier inhabitant of London enjoyed losing herself on it with some regularity. The door at 65 Great Queen Street opens to a man in a smoking jacket, holding a book and puffing away at rather bitter-smelling pipe tobacco. After a thorough visual review, the gentleman simply says, "Yes?" We introduce ourselves and the nature of our visit, to which he responds most abruptly, "If you aren't officers of the law, I believe I'm fully in my rights to refuse such an untimely visit." Tugging on his coat ends, Wiggins is a bit taken aback by the unexpected resistance.
"Well, certainly, it's your right, of course, but this isn't an official investigation. We're merely trying to give some preliminary direction to Scotland Yard."
The gleam of an astute detective returns to Wiggins's eyes.
"We had hoped to eliminate some contacts from further investigation by the constabulary, but as you say, it's your right. Good day, sir."
As we turn to leave, Dr. Bailey shuts the book with his hand and removes his pipe.
Very well, very well. Come in, but with all this talk of plague going around as of late, you'll not hold it against me if I request an expedient visit."
We enter with nods and convene in the front parlour, a room decorated with extravagance, but lacking all sense of style and unity. It speaks to a man more concerned with appearances than substance. Bailey sits shaking his head in disagreement as we recount the tale of the fisherman's barge. At each mention of plague, he puffs on his pipe with a grunt of discontentment. At our conclusion, he rises and steps before the fireplace, where he empties the ash of his pipe into the burning flames.
"Imbeciles," he growls. "Maybe now they'll listen, and let us pray for London's sake that we're not too late."
Wiggins's brow furrows, and we look to each other for some understanding of Dr. Bailey's words, but our faces sit blank.
"Dr. Bailey, if I may, who is the they you speak of? What will they listen to, and what time frame are you referring to?"
Bailey looks to us hard, as if greatly insulted. For a moment we half expect to be thrown from the residence. Instead, he repacks his pipe with a firm, irritated hand and turns back to the fireplace with a twig to catch the flame.
"The they I speak of, gentlemen, are the idiot bureaucrats in charge of London's medical policy. Clearly, since you have come to me, you know I have dedicated my life to the pursuit of human health, a discovery and solution to the diseases of man.
Allow that to underscore my words when I explain that for the last number of years I have repeatedly warned those in charge that another severe outbreak of plague is guaranteed unless the current policy is changed. By the sound of your tale and the recent other cases of this Red Death in the Times, I suspect it may be too late. Dr. Bailey takes the burning end of his twig and lights his pipe, looking not to the pipe itself, but oddly to us in our reaction to his words. Tapping his fingers atop the armrest of his chair, Wiggins looks to one of the paintings on the wall.
Why do you think they've been so hesitant to take your warnings under advisement, if I may?
Because prevention of the catastrophe that looms will cost money, time, and energy. It is far easier to sweep a potential problem under the rug and use the monies of the city to line their pockets than institute any real change to the management of this city. Dr. Bailey turns away from us, staring into the flames, and for a moment it seems as if he forgets our presence. But now they won't have a choice. 6 deaths. 6 deaths by a virulent, recurring disease. At last they'll have no choice but to get off their lard arses and do something, to do as I've told them 100 times. The name Bailey will not be lost to history. On the contrary, it will be forever synonymous with saving countless lives in the greatest city on earth. We query Dr. Bailey further on the nature of plague and his thoughts on how the events on the fishing barge took place. His answers are short, generic in nature, and add nothing to our investigation. His irritation at our presence grows as our discussion continues, until at last we decide nothing else is to be gained by speaking with a man in such an ill mood. "93 New Road, Cotton's Building, is one in a court of about a score. Despite an overwhelming fetor of human feces, the common sits crowded with inhabitants going about their daily routine, though for the most part that consists of doing little more than sitting and eating or sleeping. It's a bit ironic that people living in such cramped conditions of squalor, those most susceptible to an outbreak of plague, seem completely indifferent to the threat. Those conscious and sober enough look to us as we pass through, until a heavy-set woman has the nerve to approach.
Well, it's not often we get a couple of proper boys on New Road. Visiting Mum, are we?
Her comments elicits a stream of laughter around us.
We're looking for a Mr. Cotton, Mr. Will Cotton.
The eyes upon us scatter away. Nearly everyone in earshot impersonates a sudden deep slumber or gets up to leave with haste. Our female hostess, one of the latter, mutters as she leaves,
"Never heard of him?"
Wiggins turns and speaks softly.
Well, at least we know we're in the right spot.
Unfortunately, we both know it'll take a better part of a day to search all the flats of this court, and without help it'll likely produce no fruit. Just at the thought, an old man makes direct eye contact. He sits holding a single finger up to his forehead. As soon as we notice, he switches to 3 fingers. Wiggins looks about. Flat 13 is just a couple of doors down. As we pass the old man, he drops his hand to the ground palm up and looks to us with eyes full of weathered sadness. Wiggins drops 3 shillings as we pass. Inside the first 2 rooms of the ground floor of Flat 13, we find living quarters of the destitute. The occupants are not present, and no sign of Mr. Cotton can be found. The rooms otherwise reveal nothing of note or interest. A cataractous old man barks at us upon opening the first door on the second floor. The smell emanating from within convinces us to move on. Even if Mr. Cotton should be standing behind the door, we'll not subject ourselves to such a revolting stench. Our fortunes change when we find the second door on the upstairs locked. Wiggins wastes no time with words, and instead falls against the lock with his black purse. The lock is of particularly inferior design, and requires only 1 silver pick from Wiggins's collection. In a second we enter the flat, shutting and locking the door behind us. A ratty wool coat on a broken iron hook near the door speaks to a man of considerable size. A coil of rope and a large worn knife with a chipped blade signals the old-timer from a courtyard was indeed our friend. The presence of a few personal effects make the quarters hard to assess, but our evaluation is rendered moot as beneath the bed we discover a money sack filled with brand-new 5-pound banknotes, and a white envelope with a handwritten letter that reads most cryptically, "Tomorrow. She always ignores negative thoughts. Ask Saturday over Binger's board, quiet or ashamed." We debate the note openly for a few minutes, gaining no insight, and finally decide it best to leave and continue our decryption at a more secure location. Of course, we take the money to deliver to Scotland Yard.
If there is record of it being stolen, we'll help keep a criminal behind bars longer. If the money is rightfully Mr. Cotton's, it will most certainly be returned to him. Passing back through the courtyard, an air of apprehension lingers. Any astute individual can see we entered the flat empty-handed, though now leave with a bulging sack. Wiggins lifts his chin, pointing to a group of young men, soiled and sweaty, who mirror our steps at both sides of the courtyard. It seems we must earn our escape from 93 New Road with violence. A large man in a blue overcoat nearly collides with us. A bobby, holding his baton behind his back, prepared to use it at the slightest provocation. 2 additional officers stand behind at the mouth of the courtyard, watching us. "Mr. Wiggins," he says plainly, "Scotland Yard wanted to inform you that Mr. Cotton suffered a fairly nasty wound during his arrest. He's been taken to St. Thomas Hospital until he's well enough to move to a holding cell."
"Thank you for coming this way to tell us, Constable
McMurray," the bobby says, tipping his hat. He then looks to the bag. "I take it you just came from Cotton's room. Should I go have a look?" Wiggins hands Officer McMurray the sack.
"I'd say this is the only thing of significance. Please be sure to get it to Inspector Lestrade promptly."
With a nod, Constable McMurray takes the sack and escorts us back to the street. As the officer departs for Scotland Yard, Wiggins holds up the envelope.
"We'll just return this to the inspector a bit later."
We enter St. John's Church at 201 Charles Street, which is empty save 1 or 2 individuals in the pews sitting in silence. At our approach, they nervously cover their mouths and slide away. Our direct manner of entrance immediately grabs the attention of the parish priest.
"Good afternoon, gentlemen. How may the church be of service to you today?"
After brief introductions and mentions of the fishing barge, the priest interrupts us.
"Ah, yes, we were told to expect visitors in this regard, but I'm afraid you're late by an hour. If you will, follow me."
As directed, we follow the priest through a side door, down a short tunnel, then out into a small garden-like area marked with tombstones. 2 men, soiled and sweaty, tamp down a fresh mound of earth with spades, while a familiar face stands nearby, conducting notes with another man neither of us recognizes. As our guide directs us to the gentlemen, they take notice, and one of them raises his hand with a nod. We thank the priest and move to the gentleman with hastened steps.
"Thomas,"
Wiggins calls out, taking the hand of London's greatest criminal investigative coroner and our friend, Thomas Blood.
"Have you gents met Alan Tacker? Alan is a colleague and fellow coroner. He handles all the plague victims in the vicinity, bringing them here to St. John's."
"That's exactly why we came. We were hoping to take another look at the bodies and ask if you've uncovered anything."
Mr. Tacker douses his hands with a clear liquid from a red bottle and rubs his hands together as if washing with soap in a basin. He then proceeds to shake our hands. "Ask whatever questions you like, gentlemen, but unfortunately the bodies have already been buried."
"You just missed it, lads," says Blood. "We're set to tight schedules when it comes to deaths by plague. Even in death, the corpses pose a risk of contamination if they aren't buried fast enough."
Hanging his head on Blood's words, Wiggins responds softly, a bit defeated by our tardiness.
"Can you tell us nothing?"
"I hardly had time to get the details from Inspector Cray. Does Scotland Yard really suspect a crime in this instance? Cause of death was most certainly plague."
Folding his arms before him and taking hold of his chin in thought, Wiggins responds somewhat distantly.
"No signs of foul play? Anything out of the ordinary? Anything unusual for plague?"
Taking a step towards the graves and putting his hands on his hips, Mr. Tacker looks at the fresh mounds of dirt. "Nothing out of the ordinary, gentlemen. The men died from septicemic plague, plain and simple."
"Wiggins, why don't you track down Victor Wakely? He's another body dealer who, like Alan here, works primarily with the diseased deceased. If I may, Alan, Wakely has quite a bit more experience, and while he hasn't seen the bodies directly, he may be able to offer deeper insights."
Stepping away from the group as if his stomach turned, Mr. Tacker's upper lip curls. "He may have more years in body dealing than I, and seen more plague than I, but damned if there's not something most off-putting about that man." Whenever individuals speak in generalisms, Wiggins's curiosity is always piqued.
Can you be more specific, Mr. Tacker? Do you mean to imply he would give false information for our investigation?
Picking up his medical satchel from behind a tombstone, Mr. Tacker shakes his head. To speak frankly, gentlemen, for £1 I expect that Wakely is capable of anything, but I won't speak ill of him any further. I'm not one to be the centre of scandal. Having gathered his things, Mr. Tacker bids us farewell and leaves the church. After a more intimate goodbye to our friend Mr. Blood, we too depart and look to continue our investigation elsewhere. We arrive at the Diogenes Club, a place we visit far less often than we should. Mr. Mycroft Holmes meets us in the strangers' room, as usual. "Ah, lads, how goes the latest investigation? Surely my brother has you running all over London, if not all over England herself." We chuckle and enter, getting heavy-handed pats on the back, both a scolding for not visiting with frequency and a welcome after being away for too long. In truth, we don't know Mycroft nearly as well as we know Sherlock, but we did fight together along Holmes's brother in a case not long ago, a case that nearly saw all three of us killed. Since then, we've enjoyed a most warm relationship with each other, however long the passage of time since our last visit. We discussed the case of the Red Death over brandy. Mycroft is intrigued with the details and the stakes against London should the plague be genuine, and the precursor to a much broader outbreak. "Perhaps it's time I took that vacation to Paris I've been meaning to." Mycroft laughs with a sip of a drink. Though Mycroft has an interesting perspective on the details, he offers nothing actionable and, in truth, nothing we haven't already considered.
"Always good to visit, Mycroft. Compared to the strict all-business manner of your brother, your company is a breath of fresh air. Just don't tell Holmes I said that. I'll deny it to the grave."
And again we all have a laugh. As we finish our branding, the conversation digresses to a number of topics, causing us to thoroughly lose track of time. Somehow one of us mentions the crown jewels, eliciting a sudden change in Mycroft's manner. Leaning forward, he calls us closer, as if not to let anyone else overhear, though clearly we are the only ones present. "Did Sherlock tell you?" he asks.
"What's that, old man?"
"There's a ship coming back from Australia, bringing back spoils of the Boer War. From what I hear, the gold and diamonds rival the crown jewels themselves. Imagine it!" Mycroft leans back in his seat. "I think they mentioned something in the Times about the ship returning. Of course, they wouldn't have mentioned the valuables. That's privy information." Placing his empty glass on the table, Wiggins rises.
"Is your source reliable? Those kind of affairs always have an air of deception surrounding them."
"Completely reliable. I received the information from an old Navy friend at the Admiralty. From what I understand, they're using the riches to solidify support for a continued campaign. By the sounds of it, such an impressive hoard will get them all the eyes they need." Outside the front door of 200 Oxford Street, we see two young boys standing atop a soapbox. One holds a small book and pen.
"Well, you lads are a bit younger than I expected, but the family resemblance is unmistakable. So which of you is the older Barker brother? I have a wicked toothache and could use some clove oil and cocaine drops most urgently."
It takes more than a moment for the boys' laughter to subside.
"We're not the Barker brothers,"
one of them shouts.
"You're not?"
Wiggins smiles.
"Well, why is the store closed, and just who are you?"
The smaller boy responds quickly.
"The younger Barker is off in Liverpool, and the older brother is missing."
The larger boy proceeds to punch the smaller boy in the stomach, cutting him off.
"Shush!"
He angrily hushes his sibling.
"It's all right, lads. You look like you were trustworthy fellows. I'll let you in on a secret. We work for Mr. Sherlock Holmes, and we're investigating a case right now."
The boys fall alongside each other, looking to us with wide eyes. We might as well be a couple of Robin Hood's outlaws.
"Well, my brother's telling the truth. Mr. Charles is away on business in Liverpool. We're trying to send word for him to return at once, since his brother Mr. Robert went missing."
Leaning back on his heels, Wiggins deliberately tries to keep a casual manner.
"Missing, you say? How long ago?"
"About 3 days now, sir."
"I don't suppose you lads know if they have any leads."
The smaller boy answers, holding up his paper and pen.
"Sorry, sir, we don't know what medicines the shop has, but we were instructed to record any names, addresses, and medicines needed so the brothers can deliver when the store reopens. Shall we put you down for 1 bottle of Leeds or 2?
We both have a good laugh, which spreads quickly to the boys, though they clearly have no idea why we're making merry. Wiggins tosses them a sixpence for their efforts, and we head off to continue our investigation. At our approach to George Hall's chemist shop at 4A High Street, we see a man escort a couple from the premises, then turn and lock the front door.
"Mr. Hall!"
Wiggins calls, increasing his pace. The man answers before even turning to greet us.
"Ah, Mr. Wiggins, is it? I'm sorry, but as the sign says, we're closing early today and will be closed for the remainder of the week. I'm sure you can find another chemist to meet your needs."
Wiggins wastes no time introducing the nature of our visit. In response, Mr. Hall steps out into the street and waves down a growler.
"If you're inclined for a detour, gentlemen, you have my attention until we reach Charing Cross Station."
We all climb aboard, Mr. Hall taking the seat opposite us.
"We appreciate any time you can give us, Mr. Hall."
"I'm sorry my time is limited to this coach ride, but I'm due for a conference in Vienna, and I have a strict travel schedule to adhere to."
We nod.
"Now, what exactly can I do for you?"
Not being a long ride to the rail, Wiggins lays out as much of the story in detail as quickly as he can. When he queries Mr. Hall about the plague, Hall raises his hand, interrupting Wiggins.
"Mr. Wiggins, I am no expert on such diseases. My expertise is chemistry, of course, and the extent to which I apply that to the human body is for the common ailments of locals who visit my shop. Upset stomach, flu, and such, and then the more precise localization of organ irregularity, medicines directed to the liver, the intestines, the lungs, heart, etc. But of this Red Death, or Black Death, I can only relay the typical treatments found in any standard medical manual."
Wiggins grabs hold of a coach handle as we traverse a particularly rough and loud patch of road.
"I see. Of course."
As Wiggins stops a moment to construct a new line of questioning, Mr. Hall takes the initiative of the conversation.
"Now, this red fog that you describe, of course, many chemicals can be mixed to create a thick, viscous vapor akin to fog. The most readily accessible mixture would be nothing more than potassium nitrate, sugar, and some common red dye to tint the vapor from red to white."
Unable to mark in his journal on the rough ride of the speeding growler, Wiggins takes a moment to look away and deliberately recite the ingredients to memory.
"Of course, such composition, as well as any composition I can recall off the top of my head, would not burn if submerged in water. Now, to create a fog as such along a river, a mixture of considerable size would have to reside in a boat dry and protected from the current of the Thames."
Far faster than expected, we arrive at the rail station. Mr. Hall pays the driver, and we all exit the growler.
"Thank you for your time, Mr. Hall. You've helped more than you know."
"More than happy to help the acquaintances of Sherlock Holmes, but perhaps the importance of the case requires a chemist not fleeing the country on business, someone who can sit with all the facts and give you a proper scientific account. Have you tried Griffiths, the chemist?"
With a firm grasp of Mr. Hall's hand, Wiggins nods.
"We haven't yet. Thank you again, Mr. Hall, but maybe we'll do just that."
"Victor Wakely," the chemist responds. "He's a local body dealer who deals in—"
Mr. Hall looks to the people around him as they funnel by into the rail station and drops his voice low momentarily.
"That sickness you mentioned."
Again we nod and watch Mr. Hall move off into the crowd. To our surprise, not 3 steps away, Mr. Hall stops and walks back, his face drawn in misgiving.
"Actually, on second thought, I might avoid Mr. Wakely. I only now recall a bit of a scandal as of late, something about Wakely selling inappropriate bodies to the hospital for students. I believe he's still employed at Middlesex Hospital, but I fear the scandal has put his license at risk. I'm sorry for suggesting him, but perhaps it's not best to see him at this time."
"Understood. Thank you for your frank insight. If anything, you've saved us quite a bit of time."
Mr. Hall looks to his pocket watch, then curses his timing.
"I dare not miss the train. Goodbye, gentlemen, and best of luck."
Entering the small chemist shop at 116 Holborn Viaduct, we're met by the young teenage lad who's helped us before. Wiggins pauses, unable to remember the lad's name, but his indecision goes unnoticed. The lad looks to us with a slightly nervous smile, something a bit off, but we can tell by the look in his eye he doesn't remember ever helping us.
Welcome to Xander's. I'm sorry, but we're not filling any medicines today.
Oh, why is that, lad?
On account of Mr. Xander being absent from the shop.
Only then do we look about us and see that the place is completely devoid of customers.
Oh, right. Actually, we were hoping to speak to him directly. Any idea when he'll be in?
The young man's eyes dart about and he flushes bright crimson. Wiggins reaches out and takes the lad by the shoulder.
Lad, take a breath. Is everything all right? You don't seem to remember us. We work for Mr. Sherlock Holmes, helping Scotland Yard in the matter of criminal investigations.
With a great heaving exhale, the lad melts across the counter behind him.
Thank heavens. This is the best luck. I was getting ready to go to Scotland Yard myself.
Out with it, lad.
It's just that Mr. Xander has disappeared. I mean, he hasn't shown up in the shop for over 3 days now. I called on him at home, and there was no answer. The truth of it is, I don't even have permission to open the store, but seeing as how he left no word at all, I didn't know what else to do.
Looking about the shop, deep in thought, Wiggins rubs his chin, then turns sharply back to the young man.
Lad, you're doing a fine job with this shop, and I suspect Mr. Xander will be most appreciative of your continued attention during his absence, as you were. We'll contact you the minute we hear something.
Wiggins's vote of confidence breathes new life into the young shopkeeper. He primps his hair and clothes and walks us out with pep in his step. As we exit the shop, a woman pushes her way past us.
Where's Dr. Xander? My sister needs a delivery right away.
I'm sorry, miss. Dr. Xander isn't making deliveries at the moment.
Isn't making deliveries? She barks. My sister just saw him making a delivery earlier this week. Are you saying my sister isn't important enough?
Wiggins turns back.
Excuse me, but where does your sister live?
The woman rolls her eyes.
Not that it's any concern of yours, but 71 Lamb's Conduit Street.
We nod to the young lad and wish him luck, then rush to depart. At our inquiry about Victor Wakely at Middlesex Hospital, a nurse brings us upstairs to an operating theatre to see a Dr. Lowell. He is a robust man with thick mutton chops and comparable eyebrows, giving the distinct impression the doctor descends more from a lineage of owls than men. He reviews a paper and writes on a chalkboard at the center of the theatre as we approach. After brief introductions, he sets down his paperwork and gives us his full attention. At the conclusion of our more detailed account of the case, Dr. Lowell takes hold of one of his sideburns, stretching the hairs and releasing them with repetition. Normally, such internal affairs of the hospital would not be made public, gentlemen. However, seeing as you're working with Scotland Yard, I believe we can make an exception. We nod.
Thank you, Doctor. Any illumination you can provide on Dr. Wakely will most certainly help our case along, one way or another.
Indeed, indeed. Though in Wakely's case, you may be one of the last to use his title with accuracy. As you already pointed out, Wakely is a body dealer, specializing in the trade and transport of bodies that succumb to disease. But for the hospital, for a number of hospitals in London, Wakely lies at the center of a recent scandal, stealing bodies and redirecting them for medical examination by students. Looking about the theatre with his hands clasped behind his back, Wiggins speaks to our host most directly.
I know a number of body dealers, Dr. Lowell, and know firsthand that Dr. Wakely is neither the first nor will he be the last to undertake what he stands accused of. Is not redirecting of the dead for medical examination somewhat commonplace in this trade?
Commonplace is perhaps too strong a word, but I admit it does happen. Please bear in mind that such occurrences take place out of necessity, gentlemen. London's up-and-coming doctors need to perfect their technique and knowledge if they are to service the population adequately.
Right, of course. I'm well aware of the stringent requirements medical students must overcome to receive their licensing. In no way do we intend to lay blame on your fine institution. We only seek to understand the scope of Dr. Wakely's crime.
Walking around a gurney in the center of the theatre, Dr. Lowell reviews a number of medical instruments atop a rolling cart.
Of course, we have very stringent rules governing the use of cadavers for medical students, perhaps the strictest in London. And this, in part, is the source of the scandal. The sheer number of bodies moved at Wakely's approval, leaving quite a few empty caskets for burial grounds, is just unacceptable.
Dr. Lowell leans on the gurney and lets out a deep sigh.
Of what I speak now, I must insist you relay to no one.
We nod and move closer, so the full volume of the doctor's voice is not needed.
We've uncovered preliminary evidence that Wakely stored bodies in his old office at 41B New Cut. We have reports he not only removed organs at this location, but held illegal teaching classes. But the matter is possibly even more diabolical.
We lean in even closer, Wiggins taking hold of the gurney himself, listening intently as Dr. Lowell continues.
Our initial inquiry revealed a number of illicit funds transferred to Wakely's name at Barclays Bank. Such funds speak to a larger, more organized crime. Though this is certainly not yet proven, we expect he may have been working with a number of workhouses, encouraging the terminally ill to, let us say, forego any required medicines to hasten their deaths. You see, gentlemen, as gruesome as it is to admit, a fresh corpse, and corpses with particular ailments for study, increase dramatically in value.
Releasing the gurney, Wiggins backs up, a sense of mild shock about him.
As if there weren't enough to encourage death and sickness in this city. Do you really think him capable of such acts?
Before Dr. Lowell can answer, students begin filing into the theater. The doctor jerks upright and tends to his coat.
I say, we don't have all the facts, but I well suspect that individual thinks more highly of money than the advancement of medical science. And either way, I fully expect the inquiry to revoke his practice of medicine when all is said and done.
We thank Dr. Lowell for his insights and leave him to his students. A constable, smoking outside St. Thomas Hospital, tips his hat at our approach.
All business, I hope. Nothing personal today.
We look to the bobby a bit confused.
Your visit to the hospital. One of your cases, and not a visit to a dear one.
Though he clearly knows us, neither of us recall the bobby's name.
You here for the goon we dragged in earlier?
If that would be the gentleman arrested on the Thames earlier today, then yes.
Behind a puff of smoke, the constable gives us a deep laugh.
Clearly you haven't met Mr. Cotton. That one may be a dozen things, but I assure you, gentleman isn't one of them.
Wiggins sets his hands on his hips, drawing back the sides of his coat.
Why did you wind up here at St. Thomas and not directly at the yard?
I go and give one bloke a good whack on the head, and suddenly it's all a fuss. Of course, never mind what you did to poor Robinson. He'll be eating nothing but soup for the rest of the month.
What was he arrested for?
Throwing some dock worker head first into the Thames. When the dock worker got out, he called for the nearest bobby. The stupid arse, Mr. Cotton, was still loitering around the boats when the boys showed up. Took 4 men to finally subdue him. 4 men and a good crack on a noggin.
After getting the ward and bed number for Mr. Cotton, we say goodbye to the constable and find our way upstairs. Room 202 sits empty, save rather a large, square-jawed individual lying on his back on a hospital bed, his left wrist shackled to a ring anchored in the wall. At our entrance, he looks up and rolls his eyes at us.
For fuck's sake, how many mutton shunters do they have in this place?
Mr. Cotton, we're not the police, but we'd like to ask you a few questions.
He leans toward us, stretching all his body weight so that the only thing keeping him from reaching us is his own arm restraining him to the wall.
I wouldn't tell a couple of chief inspectors themselves, never mind 2 bloody link boys such as you.
If you answer our questions, perhaps we can put in a good word with the magistrate. A little help in our investigation could go a long way.
The goon cuts Wiggins off, grabbing and pulling at the irons that bind him with both hands.
Oh, fuck off. Just let me get my hands on one of you.
Just as a precaution, we take a step back. At the same time, the door to the room opens and a man in a doctor's long white coat enters.
Ugh!
Cotton screams in a faux pain, holding his head in one hand and falling back on the bed.
I can't hardly see. Somebody get a doctor in here. I can't bear the pain.
Ignoring Mr. Cotton, the doctor stops before us.
Are you two here in an official police capacity?
Wiggins seems a bit distracted by the doctor's uniform, and he struggles to find 2 simple words.
Not exactly.
Then I'll have to ask you to leave. This man is in police custody and unable to receive visitors at this time.
Not wanting to make a scene, and seeing that Mr. Cotton isn't really keen on talking with us, we depart without further incident. Just outside the door, Wiggins places his hat on with a smile.
Did you see it? The tag on his uniform pocket? That was one Dr. Percival Bailey. I fathom the odds of Mr. Cotton winding up in the same hospital that Bailey works at would be quite low.
He pauses with a focused look in his eyes. "Most interesting." Only at Wiggins's complete thought do we take notice of a hospital orderly standing before us, kinking his neck around to try and get a good look into the room whence we just came.
"Aye, is that Will Kong?"
"It is. He's in for a minor injury. I'm sure you can see him shortly. A friend of yours?"
The orderly waves his hand in a casual manner.
Will was an orderly at Middlesex Hospital for a time. We worked many shifts together. Now that's a lad you want on your side when you get in a scuffle with an angry patient, believe me. Haven't seen him in ages. I wonder what he's been up to all this time.
Wiggins nods and smiles, purposefully trying to set the orderly at ease.
"Good show. I'm sure he'll appreciate catching up. How long did you work together?"
Couple of years, I reckon. He was still there when they transferred me here back in '89.
A group of bobbies appears at the top of the stairs and make their way towards us.
Right then, gents, I'll swing by and check back in a bit.
With that, the orderly turns and heads off down the hall in the opposite direction of the officers. When they arrive, the bobby we met outside earlier steps before us.
"Hope you had a nice chat, lads. Turns out we caught a much bigger fish than we realized."
"How's that now?"
Wiggins asks, perking up.
"We confirmed Mr. Cotton is wanted for piracy under the alias Will Archer. Apparently he's a senior member of the Hard Boys, a dock gang notorious for looting moored vessels here in London, as well as freebooting all along the coast. Since the doctors have released him back into our custody, it's straight off to Scotland Yard."
Wiggins withdraws his pipe, placing it between his lips, then pats the officer on the shoulder.
"I wouldn't turn your back on that one, boys. Not even for a second."
"I'd like to see him try it," one of the bobbies replies, getting a laugh from the entire bunch.
"Say, where did you pick him up again?"
Filing into the room, the last officer stands holding the patient room door open and looks back to us.
"London Bridge Wharf."
After introducing ourselves and inquiring about the escaped madman, we're brought to one Dr. Marie Shanks, a woman of irregular features, a mild overbite, and a slightly nervous nature. She examines us intensely from small brown eyes behind thick spectacles.
"I'm glad Scotland Yard is finally taking this matter seriously."
"Come again, Dr. Shanks?"
"It wasn't our fault," she blurts out, nearly falling out of her chair. "Were you told it was the hospital's fault? Is that in the official report?"
Looking toward the ceiling to avoid eye contact, Wiggins adjusts his ascot, clearly uncomfortable with the words that spill from his mouth.
"No, of course not. The official report doesn't hold Bethlehem Hospital responsible at all."
He finally drops his eyes down to the doctor.
"After all, as with many mentally unfit patients as Bethlehem treats, there's bound to be some that fall through the cracks and make trouble."
The doctor slips back into her chair with a short exhale.
"Well, I'm glad you see it like that. As I've noted on more than one occasion to Scotland Yard, Mr. Maybrick isn't just a lunatic. He's highly intelligent while suffering from high cognitive derangement with extreme violent tendencies."
Apparently we look to the doctor a smidge too long with blank expressions. She repeats herself in layman's terms.
"He can function on his own, plan and plot, scheme to violent ends. And I assure you he will be no easy catch, even with the entire city constabulary alerted."
Removing his journal, Wiggins nods to the doctor.
"We thank you for making that clear, Dr. Shanks. I wonder, you speak of Mr. Maybrick's intelligence. Does he come from a learned background, the medical profession, perhaps?"
Without referring to any file, the doctor narrows her eyes.
"How did you know? I was told Scotland Yard didn't have a file in him before the latest incidents."
"Just a deduction. We know really nothing about this madman."
"Point of fact, he studied to become a chemist but did not complete his schooling. I was never able to verify it, but I suspect he spent some time studying law as well. I had a number of conversations with him where I felt the pressure of a barrister's examination, complete with a familiarity of legal terminology."
Wiggins turns to his journal as he records the doctor's insights.
"So a man of his background might be familiar with chemicals like ether, chloroform, or chloral hydrate?"
"Most certainly, at least at a basic level."
We glance at one another, then Wiggins pauses, lowers his pen, and turns back to the doctor.
"Do you know by chance if Mr. Maybrick did any study in the realm of disease, plague specifically?"
"The romantic in me wouldn't be surprised one bit. Mr. Maybrick constantly screamed about the end of times, that the world would be overcome by plague, and that it would start in London, killing 2/3 of the population in a fortnight. This speculative fiction was one of his favourites to discuss whenever agitated."
Dr. Shanks removes her glasses and pinches the bridge of her nose, then taps the side of her right temple repeatedly with an index finger. After a moment of silently staring, she returns her spectacles and continues.
But the pragmatic in me wouldn't expect so. You see, the dealings of such dangerous diseases are not the topics covered in early medical schooling. I think it unlikely that Mr. Maybrick had the clarity and persistence to reach that point in his studies, though in truth I do believe he is capable of just about anything he puts his mind to.
We thank Dr. Shanks for seeing us and bid her good day, but as we rise to leave, she blurts out an address, 16 New Cut.
Gentlemen, once again I implore Scotland Yard to take every measure to capture Mr. Maybrick. Plague or no plague, this man has the potential to be a menace to London, the likes of which we haven't seen in a decade. He must be caught as soon as possible. The address I've given you is his sister, Mary, an only surviving family member. Perhaps she can give you further insights that have eluded Bethlehem Hospital.
The London Bridge Wharf is not a large commercial dock for major shipping transport. The wharf is smaller in stature and commonly suited for boats in distress and local individuals with small recreational vessels. We descend the steps at the end of Underbridge Lane and enter the wharf. There we see a gent all in grey talking to an old man fishing off the stone ledges beneath the bridge supports. We look briefly to each other, then move out over the water, taking note of a number of smaller vessels moored nearby. Visually examining both the wharf and the vessels, everything appears quite normal. At the end of the dock, we look up to the bottom of London Bridge. For a moment, we get lost in an inconsequential discussion of the bridge's construction. At the conclusion of the conversation, we turn and find a man in grey approaching, casually swinging a wooden belaying pin tied to the end of a 3-foot length of rope.
"Ah, would you be the steward of the dock?"
The gentleman nods. "Parsons. You fellows looking to head out on the Thames?" Bringing forth his pipe and tobacco pouch, Wiggins grins.
"Not at all, lad. Actually, we were hoping to have a word with you. Are you the same Mr. Parsons who had an unfortunate run-in with a Mr. Cotton earlier, no?"
A sneer breaks across Mr. Parsons' face. "Aye, that'd be me. That bloke got what it was coming to him. Heard they took him off to the hospital. Just lucky the bobbies were here. I've taken down larger blokes than him, I have." Striking a match on an iron spike embedded in one of the pier pillars, Wiggins lights his pipe.
"No doubt. Can you tell us exactly how it happened?"
Pushing past us, Mr. Parson flips his pin into his hand and points with it to the last pier post on the right. "Not much to it. The goon paddled up and moored right there, in Mr. Bennington's slip. I watched him for a good 20 minutes fiddling with the contents of his boat, until he finally stepped up onto the dock and started walking off." Through a plume of smoke, Wiggins asks,
"This Bennington chap, who's he?"
"Oh, lovely man. A teacher, I think. Comes like clockwork every other day with his daughter. Gives me a shilling to tie him on and off. That's why I got a little hot. That stupid bloke had the whole dock to moor. Why take Mr. Bennington's spot? And when I told him he'd have to move, he goes and pulls out a whole handful of shillings." The brow of Wiggins's right eye raises.
"And you didn't take it?"
Throwing both hands up as if to stop Wiggins, he says, "I'm not daft. I'll take a tip any chance I get, but I've got morals too. A job is just a job. Anyway, as soon as he offers me the money, I tell him I'll gladly move him down, put him in a prime slip myself. Next thing I know, he screams, 'Touch my boat and I'll kill you,' and shoves me straight off the deck. Tossed me right into the water like I was nothing." Wiggins turns to the boats bobbing up and down, rocking against the dock.
"I take it one of these boats belongs to Mr. Cotton?"
The dock worker walks down 3 boats over and steps onto the bow of a small rowboat. "This one right here. I should have just cast it off and be done with him, but I don't know. I don't like messing with folks' boats, I guess. And after all, he didn't hurt me none, just gave me a soaking." Looking to the boat, we see a bundle of cloth at the back. Wiggins hops aboard and nimbly moves to uncover the canvas. Beneath it sits a large stack of wooden planks tied together. The planks are rough-cut lumber, almost like driftwood. Something's familiar about them, but neither of us can place it.
"Mr. Parsons, are there any other unfamiliar boats moored here today or in the last day or so?"
"Always a couple, sir. We're not too strict around here with the personal fishing skiffs and such. If you dock and don't sign in, the responsibility of the boat is all your own." He walks us to them. Just as he described, the boats are small, simple boats, practically empty until the last one. Here we find a sack sitting in the center of the boat. Seeing us look at it in curiosity, Mr. Parsons speaks out. "Of course, I check everything that comes in. Once had a guy trying to leave a skiff with a dozen crates of gunpowder. Another lady had a basket of kittens sitting right at the tip of her bow. In any case, that sack there, I don't reckon I know what it is, some sort of red flower. I took a match to a cup of it, and it didn't explode, so I figured it wasn't a worry." We thank the lad for his time and leave to continue our investigation. We return once again to Barclays Bank, one of London's premier institutions. The entrance, with an elegantly carved eagle surmounting it, reminds us of our ongoing discussion with our teacher, Mr. Holmes, about the root of all evil and how following the money, as it were, often leads to direct insights into criminal investigations. We have just such aspirations as we enter the bank and ask for one Patrick Prescott, a more recent acquaintance at the bank who is assigned to work with Scotland Yard in active criminal matters. Prescott is wound a little tight, a stickler for rules and regulations, a man past his prime in physique, but sharp as a tack and, as Wiggins puts it, a spy in another life. We've indulged his ego in this regard on more than one occasion, with fantastic results. God bless him. At our brief of the case, Mr. Prescott's eyes go wide and he takes up a handkerchief to his nose and mouth. The panic on his face speaks to a frequent reader of the Times. Perhaps you should leave me a list of your needs, and I'll send over any information I have to Baker Street. Not to be rude, but you understand the bank is the engine of commerce for the city. If it were to become the epicentre of any significant sickness— Wiggins interrupts before Prescott can go any further. After a number of assurances to our health and some casual banter to put the poor man at ease, he returns the handkerchief to his pocket. We run down nearly all the names gathered in Wiggins's journal regarding the case at hand. It doesn't take long for Prescott to come up empty on all accounts. Nothing suspicious, out of place, nor incriminating in the slightest. A few minutes of light conversation and a few details to the case the Times won't dare print has Mr. Prescott in a most pleasant mood. Just amazing the way you gents not only put the pieces together, but you see the pieces in the first place. Good show, sirs. Though it certainly sounds like no foul play at hand, if Scotland Yard has you gents on it, my money says you'll find something. We all have a chuckle and then rise to depart, when Wiggins recalls one more name.
Patrick, what about Mr. Wakely, Victor Wakely? He's a doctor and a body dealer working out of Middlesex.
Mr. Prescott looks to a large ledger on his desk, shaking his head in the negative. He then rises and moves to exit the room. One moment, gentlemen. The name didn't come up under our Master General ledger, but we have separate records for civic organizations and those under their employ. We wait no more than 10 minutes for Mr. Prescott's return. He appears with a handful of loose papers and, instead of taking his seat, sets them out before us on the desk. Now I see why Mr. Wakely didn't appear on the master ledger. He just recently withdrew all his money and closed his account. Reviewing the paperwork, Wiggins looks up to Mr. Prescott with wide, questioning eyes.
The amount on the account is redacted. Might we know?
Straightening up with a slight scowl, Prescott replies, Gentlemen, I'm here to help in any way I can, but we do have legal considerations for our customers. Unless direct criminal activity is identified with paper from the court— Wiggins nods.
Understood. Not a problem.
His casual attitude draws Mr. Prescott near, and he confides, Modest, gentlemen, most modest. But here, this just came in through loans and leverages. He slides one of the papers into view. A sizable loan against his home, the terms quite in favour of the bank, allowing Mr. Wakely the maximum possible amount of cash. Shuffling through another set of papers, Mr. Prescott's face lights up. Now, I wonder if he sold the property at 41B New Cut. I remember now, that was his office for some time. After a moment, he pauses and reviews the papers before him. No, it looks like that was a rental property. Leaving us to ponder the paperwork, Mr. Prescott walks about the desk and returns to his seat. Of course, gentlemen, closing an account and taking a loan against one's property, even in the favour of the bank, is hardly anything I would call suspicious. Men of his status and class taking such loans is quite commonplace, usually to fund some business opportunity or investment, or, as a point of fact, often to repair and ultimately sell the very property they put up as collateral. Our knock upon the door of the run-down house at 16 New Cut is answered by a gaunt fellow barely able to keep his eyes open. Mild opium addiction by the looks of it.
Yeah? He says, emphasizing with a query.
Is Mrs. Mary Maybrick present?
Closing his eyes for a second, the chap's speech starts to trail off as if he's going to nod off right in front of us.
What's that bitch gone and gotten herself into now?
Quite nothing, I assure you. We'd simply like to have words with her about her brother.
Ignoring Wiggins's reply, the gentleman simply turns and leaves us at the threshold. Stepping inside, we watch as he ascends a flight of stairs, calling out with an indifferent tone,
Oh, darling wife, a couple of gents here want to talk to you about that bastard brother of yours.
He pauses his ascent to lean against the rail and mumbles under his breath,
I wish he would be most proper and just get himself killed already.
At the end of the hall beyond the base of the stairs, a middle-aged woman stumbles into view. She struggles to pull up a nightgown about her bare bosom while trying with all her ability not to lose the cigarette in her hand. By the looks of her matted wild hair, we've roused the woman from bed.
"Who are you, and what do you want to know about Morris?"
Before we can get a word in, she continues,
"On second thought, I don't even care who you are, though by the looks of you I'd say bill collectors of some kind."
"That's a new one," chuckles Wiggins. "Actually, Mrs. Maybrick—"
"Jensen, gentlemen, I'm a married woman,"
she interrupts, holding up a hand brandishing a cheap tarnished ring.
"My brother and I no longer share the same name, and under inquiry you'll find it was the last of our similarities. Long abandoned, thank you very much. Whoever you are, these are poor times to come calling. Haven't you fools heard about the Red Death? It's just looking for thresholds to cross."
"Mrs. Jensen, it's quite important. As a matter of fact, our visit is precisely about the scare of Red Death on Thames of late. If you could just spare a moment of your time—"
She leans against the wall and takes a long drag. For the first time she takes notice of Wiggins's youth and good looks and tries to straighten up her hair.
"What's it got to do with me?"
"Not you, Mrs. Jensen, but it was noted that your brother made a claim about a plague befalling London. We understand he had some medical schooling. Did he ever talk to you about the threat of plague on the city?"
Exhaling and looking up towards the top of the stairs where our original host slowly shrinks away, she responds,
"Morris really hates this city, or to be more accurate, the people in this city. They've never treated him right. He may be crazy as a loon, but he's smarter than most."
"So we gathered. The threat, Mrs. Jensen?"
Tossing her cigarette to the floor and stepping on it with the calluses of her heel, she shakes her head.
"My brother is a deranged lunatic. Any talk of any length with him usually ended with a dozen threats against London. Burning it to the ground, setting with plagues, summoning a swarm of locusts."
She laughs.
"He's quite imaginative when he wants to be. You know, I already told most of this to the police after Morris escaped Bethlehem Hospital. Why don't you go talk to them and stop pestering me?"
Wiggins reaches into his pocket and pulls forth a handful of coins.
"There are lives at stake, ma'am. Did he ever speak seriously about a plague? Do you believe him capable of such an act? We're willing to pay for any information you can give us."
Her face sours.
"Keep your money. My brother has a festering hatred in his heart. It's been there since he was a boy. Mentally and morally he's capable of carrying out any threats he's made, but quite frankly it's none of my business. Morris has brought nothing but trouble to my family, God rest their souls. I haven't spoken to him in years, and as far as I'm concerned he's already dead and buried."
"41B New Cut" turns out to be a closed storefront. Its large bay windows are so fully dusted over that the inside of the shop lies completely concealed. All signage on the shop has been removed, giving a most desolate and abandoned feel to the outside.
"I don't fathom there's any point in knocking. Clearly no one's been here for some time."
We lean against the front door, blocking it from the view of any passerby, though the street behind us is quiet. Wiggins removes his black purse, then, looking to the door, freezes in place. After a brief pause, he slowly returns the case to his vest.
"Well, looks like we won't be needing that."
Gazing upon the lock of the front door, we see only an empty hole. With a mere nudge, the door swings open. The inside of the office mirrors the windows to the letter, with dust and cobwebs in such abundance that we find ourselves gagging at every breath.
"Well, I stand corrected. It seems the storefront has not been as abandoned as I believed."
Wiggins points to the floor where recent footprints cut through the dust. Making our way into a back room, the horrible smell of putrefying meat assaults us. Our struggle becomes twofold, trying to find a breath of clean air while searching for a gaslight to tap. Though we eventually find the latter, to our dismay the gas no longer runs. After a few minutes fumbling around in the dark, we come up with a lantern and a few candles, all showing signs of recent use. Their feeble illumination reveals a laboratory the likes of which one would expect from Shelley's Frankenstein or Stevenson's Jekyll and Hyde. Glass vessels and beakers of every size and shape, burners, metal frameworks, and cages, dozens of cages atop tables and stacked on the floor. Within the cages we discover the source of the putrid smell insulting our senses. Rats. Dead, rotting rats. Though we instinctively recoil from the gruesome sight, Wiggins steels himself and shines the lantern among them. Though some lay completely lost to decay, others must have expired far more recently and retain much of their original physique.
"Look here, the blackened discoloration of the skin and pustulent boils. That is not the onset of decomposition. It looks more like disease."
Searching the room is most unpleasant, but we make a go of it as best we can, hoping to find the break our investigation desperately needs. The only thing we find is a handful of scattered papers, which Wiggins doesn't take the time to read, but instead gathers in hand. Finding nothing else of note, we retreat back into the main room and stand in the threshold of the open door, taking in deep breaths of fresh air. Only then does Wiggins rifle through the papers.
"Scientific notations," he exclaims with excitement. "Clinical. Scientific. I can't make much sense of it, but clearly someone was experimenting on these rats with disease. And I would bet a year's wages the disease is plague, or more specifically this Red Death." As Wiggins reviews the papers, a blank certificate of deposit from Barclays Bank slips free and falls to the ground. The deposit slip seems new, with no name or account noted. As Wiggins moves to place the papers inside his coat, we notice a handwritten scribble on the back of one. It reads, "Third message writes as, first line, third letter, second line, fourth letter." A most interesting turn of events. Finding plague experiments in Dr. Victor Wakely's old office is damning, to say the least. With a shake of his head, Wiggins pockets the scientific papers and grabs hold of the door. "I know what you're thinking, lad, but don't get ahead of yourself. Wakely closed shop some time ago. Without a lock on the door, anyone could be making use of this dreadful laboratory. It may be a smoking gun, but just whose smoking gun is yet to be seen."
We arrive at St. Saviour's under a grey, lowering sky, light drizzle, and a sharp briskness to the air. The St. Saviour's dock anchors to the buildings on both sides of a somewhat narrow inlet. A second lower level of the dock extends out into the water, creating a maze-like walkway that rises and falls at the waterline. The tide being out at present, it sets the lower level about 10 feet below us and for the most part out of view. Walking along the upper dock, we immediately notice the absence of any large boats. As we near and catch a better glimpse of the lower dock, we find the entire inlet is completely devoid of any boats whatsoever. A bit strange for this time of year, we reckon. Though no vessels are present, a dozen or so dock workers, all larger men in drab-colored coats and knit hats, move about the lower dock with purpose. Some carry crates, others carry coils of ropes, other rolls of large canvas. When a couple of the workers climb up a ladder to grab some supplies about 20 feet from our position, Wiggins calls out to them,
"Hello, Governor. What's going on here?"
They don't so much as turn in Wiggins's direction.
"Well, let's have a closer look,"
Wiggins says under his breath as he takes hold of a rope ladder. "Sorry, lads, you'll have to move on. The dock is closed today." We turn and see a very large man carrying 2 pails in his left hand. His face looks more like a prize-fighter than a dock worker, with a nose that seems to run in 2 directions at once, and a mouth full of chipped, discolored teeth. Despite a rough, intimidating presence, there's a jovial air to the man. Shaking his head in dramatic fashion, Wiggins strikes up a proper performance.
No, this will never do. We have a shipment of cotton arriving before nightfall."
The worker's face loses all expression, as if Wiggins just told him his mum died. "Gents, as I said, the dock is closed. You'll have to make other arrangements. And if your ship is coming in before nightfall, you best leave now and get on it." The worker pushes past us to the rope rail at the dock's edge. Pulling his lips taut, he whistles with a shriek. "Sout! Coming down!" he shouts, bringing 2 of the workers rushing over below.
"Why in the world is the dock closed?" Wiggins laments. "This is most unacceptable."
Passing one of the pails to a calloused hand poking up from below, the dock worker replies without turning his attention to us. "If you were scheduled to port, you should have been notified. A couple of the piers collapsed. We're replacing the rotted ones and sealing up all the rest." He points down and across the way. Looking over, we see 2 dock workers painting one of the piers black with a substance from a bucket similar to the ones being passed down as we speak.
"Ah, I see. Of course,"
replies Wiggins. But before we step back from the rail of the dock, Wiggins motions with his head to the rest of the piers in view. All of them look old and weathered, not a fresh coat of paint to be seen. As we look about the lower dock, one of the workers wheeling a barrel suddenly loses control, sending it crashing into one of the many stacks of crates. The crates collapse in a clamor, some shattering to pieces, other falling into the Thames. The ones sent into the river bob up and down like discarded rubbish, all of them quite empty. The workers throw profanities at each other, arguing over the mess and extra work of getting more crates.
"This is most inconvenient," spits Wiggins under a false guise of irritation. "Expect a formal complaint to the dock supervisor by Monday. Let's go. We've got to secure another berth and get word to the ship."
As we leave, the dock worker who spoke to us rises up and tips his hat to us with a slight grin. A hansom cab pulls up to us as we exit the dock.
"Ride, governors?"
As we open the door to enter, Wiggins turns and darts away.
"Hold the door for me. I'll be right back."
He rushes back along the dock, sticking close to the buildings, deliberately avoiding being seen, until at last he dashes over to the rail and takes a good look at the lower docks. Before any of the dock workers notice they're being spied upon, Wiggins darts back to the hansom cab, shutting the door behind him.
"Just as I suspected. As soon as we left, those workers stopped painting that pier. And all those empty crates? What do empty crates have to do with repairing dock piers? No, I don't know who those men are or what they're up to, but they're not repairing the dock. Of that I'm certain."
Our cab takes us to the main entrance of Buckingham Palace, where we find an unusually long line of traffic entering the grounds. After some minutes, we finally arrive at the grand white pillars, each topped with 5 lamps, and the intricately woven wrought iron gate that has yielded before some of the world's greatest nobility. The gate guard approaches us with a ledger in hand and calls up to the driver.
"Name?"
"Don't know, sir, but I believe it's official business of Scotland Yard."
The guard steps over to tap on the window when a series of shouts come from a carriage behind us. At the same time, 2 people approach the gate guard red-hot. They demand to be granted entrance to the palace grounds on foot. Meanwhile, another guard comes up behind the gate guard, whispering into his ear. Overwhelmed and flustered, the gate guard waves us through. Beyond the main gate, the palace grounds buzz with additional guards and valets. Pulling away from the other coaches, our driver takes us to one of the tunnels leading to the inner courtyards. Here we find the gate closed, with no one present to meet our driver. After a moment, we extricate ourselves from the taxi and pay the driver.
"Hello!"
Wiggins shouts. Another gate guard appears.
"All guests need to enter through the main gate, gents."
"We're not with that pandemonium, whatever it's about, I assure you. We're working on a case for Sherlock Holmes in Scotland Yard."
"And it brought you here to Buckingham?" The guard snickers. "Sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but the Princess of Bavaria is visiting. We're only receiving authorized visitors, though I suppose if it's an emergency from Scotland Yard—"
Wiggins cuts the guard off in mid-sentence. The last thing either of us want is a scandal surrounding Mr. Holmes or Inspector Cray in the middle of citywide fanfare.
"No, it's not anything worth waking the Queen over. We'll return after the Princess departs, if our investigation still requires it."
We bid the guard farewell and rush to catch up with our departing taxi, which is still stuck in line waiting for the main gate to let him exit. Once again, we find ourselves ready to close another investigation, more or less. As we approach 221B Baker Street, Sherlock Holmes exits the building, then tips his hat in our direction. He pulls up the collar of his coat to defend against the rain that begins to fall steadily. "Excellent timing, gents. We've got to get a cab to the river at once." En route, Wiggins leans in.
"Out with it, Holmes. What's this all about?"
"The case, of course. What else?" Holmes chuckles. "That is to say, if there is a case in the first place." Well, what say you, lads? Is this Red Death the work of a natural higher power, or the efforts of a singular deranged mortal mind? Wiggins leans back in the carriage. Holmes always makes a game of it, and by the uncertain look in Wiggins's eye, he tires of falling victim to Holmes's perfectly laid traps.
The Red Death is most certainly the work of man, not nature.
Splendid, Mr. Wiggins. Then you most certainly know our exact destination and what we are sure to find when we get there. Holmes retrieves his pipe while looking to Wiggins with a slight grin.
Well, not exactly. I mean, there are always multiple possibilities where we might be off to at the moment, and I...
Relax, lad. You know I only pressure you to summon your best. When I am not present, you must persevere to pressure yourself. Only then will you hone your instincts to a razor's edge.
Well noted, Holmes.
Trying to keep his match steady in the jostling coach long enough to light his pipe, Holmes continues. In this particular case, you are granted much leeway, as the case was not only difficult, but split into two distinct atypical parts. Finally taking his tobacco to a glowing ember, Holmes waves the match out. May I?
Of course, Holmes. Let us see if our take on it compares.
The first mystery of the case lies most directly on the fisherman's barge. Simply put, did the men die naturally, or was foul play afoot? First, we take the facts as they fall. All 4 men die simultaneously, it seems, in the middle of a meal with no signs of any trouble or issue. Knowing what we know of the disease, as informed by any basic medical journal on plague or by one of our many doctor friends, Watson, Thomas Blood, etc., we know this to be an impossibility, or at least unknown to the medical historic record. With a momentary pause to draw on his pipe, Holmes blows forth a thick cloud. Had you visited with Fletcher Clinton, you would have heard an account of a thick red mist seeking out of a boat, then Death himself rising onto the boat.
But, Mr. Holmes, Wiggins interjects, the witness was drunk at the time. I don't see how we can put much weight into anything he recalls.
Of the spectacular details, most certainly not. Any normal witness has a tendency to exaggerate, and a drunkard, of course, is almost completely unreliable. But inebriation rarely compensates for the distortion of mundane details. It is here that we must recall Mr. Clinton's words with accuracy. To do so, we would remember that the Grim Reaper himself, after exiting and shutting the door on the fishing barge cabin, only then turned to our witness, giving him a most thorough fright.
Great Scott, of course,
Wiggins calls out, jumping back against his seat. He can't help but laugh.
What cause do spirits have to close doors behind them?
Returning to his pipe, Holmes continues. It is here that we understand the men died in a most unexplainable fashion, and that there was most certainly another person aboard the vessel at the time of their death. Were there no physical clues at the scene of the crime? Quickly retrieving his journal, Wiggins scans the page.
Shards of glass near to the wheelhouse door, and the plank of wood caught in the tide with an unidentified red discoloration.
Holmes nods. We'll get to the planks in a moment, but the shards of glass. We already heard from the witness that this Grim Reaper knelt down next to the door for a moment, and this was perhaps his one true mistake, for after the individual poured out the liquid, most likely chloral hydrate, to knock the men unconscious, he mistakenly left the empty container on the deck of the boat, where it was broken by the opening of the door or accidentally crushed underfoot. Now, assuming the contents of the glass did indeed render the men completely and most suddenly unconscious, this would explain their simultaneous collapse during the meal. It was here that our Grim Reaper entered, and here that he most certainly injected all 4 men with a most potent form of septicemic plague. Of the exact nature we have no proof, but I suspect if the bodies were to be exhumed and examined with complete scrutiny, a small needle mark would be found within the necrotic or pustule tissue of each man.
No wonder Blood didn't see it. The men were in such bad shape it would be unheard of to examine each and every deformity from such a disease.
Most certainly the murderer's intent. So there you have it. Someone sneaks onto the barge, knocks the men out, and injects them with a highly potent strain of plague. It festers and spreads throughout their bodies, wreaking havoc on their organs and ultimately incapacitating them before they can even once rise from their meal. Rubbing his chin in thought, Wiggins makes a soft-spoken deduction.
The only man capable of such a feat would most assuredly possess a medical background.
Indeed, but not just a medical background, Holmes says. Clearly one that specializes in disease and plague, for I find it highly irregular that a medical professional, someone generally learned in the dangers of such a disease, but not fully prepared for its intricacies, would be willing to wield it as a weapon. No, that is the mark of an expert. Thrown forward by a large stone in the road, Wiggins throws his arm up, just barely preventing a collision with Holmes.
And then to the second clue, the plank of wood?
Certainly, Holmes says, helping Wiggins right himself. The fog rolling in against the fisherman was red in color, the same color as the dye on the wood found at the scene, I assume. We nod.
More or less.
Then it cannot be coincidence, for when it comes to murder, there are no coincidences. Given the fact that the wood was found floating, we can assume the discoloration was dry, or at least fairly dry enough to allow certain chemical reactions.
Then the fog was artificial in nature.
The look on Wiggins's face, twisting in confusion, brings a soft pat of sympathy to his knee. "The entire deck's stacked against you, lads," Holmes says with a smile.
"What's that now?"
asks Wiggins, shaking his head in an attempt to refocus his attention. "I say, of course, the fog was artificial in nature. Had not nearly all of London's finest chemists been in Vienna these last few days at a medical symposium, you might have elicited help in discovery of that fact. As I understand it, our culprit was bold enough to forcefully confine a number of those who remained." With a nod, Wiggins continues,
"So the scoundrel used the fog to hide himself until he was able to board the barge."
"But why add the dye, Mr. Wiggins? No, the red fog was created with a most deliberate intent, as we will see in the second part of our case." Throwing up his hands to stop his mentor, Wiggins shouts,
"But Holmes, we haven't even a clue who this Grim Reaper fellow is."
"Haven't we? A medical profession with expertise in plague and with a strong enough background in chemistry to know that sugar, potassium nitrate, and a touch of red dye will create a red vapor. Do any of your contacts fit that description?" Wiggins doesn't need to refer to his journal. In fact, a bit shocked, he loses the strength to hold it upright, allowing it to fall along his leg.
"I don't believe it. The body dealer, Dr. Victor Wakely? He meets all the criteria to the letter. And now, when I recall his personal case infested with ants, insects drawn to sugar, it all lines up nicely."
Clearly, after all, he is the murderer. Shaking his head in disbelief, Wiggins says,
"To be honest, I had considered him, but motive, Holmes. You always speak to us of motive, and the killing of these random people with absolutely no connection to each other just doesn't fit."
Leaning back in the carriage, with a particularly long draw on his pipe, Holmes exhales and begins again. As I mentioned, the true nature of this case is most difficult. For this Mr. Victor Wakely is the worst kind of murderer, a completely indiscriminate one, a murderer willing to kill the innocent at leisure to get what he wants. Wiggins looks out the window of the coach after assessing the location and time of our arrival, sits back and withdraws his own pipe.
"How did you come to it, Holmes? The desires of such a man?"
When you are stranded and none of the pieces of the puzzle fit, you must look to the pieces from a different angle, to see the puzzle itself from a different vantage point. 3 sets of murders, based on this horrific new Red Death, all on the Thames. Now, if your investigation is correct, of which I am sure it is, and the victims did not have any connections whatsoever, that can only mean that it was not their deaths individually, but as a whole that served a purpose not to the individual families affected by the tragedy, but to all of London.
"I'm not sure I follow, Holmes. It seems like a lot of hysteria to me."
Holmes narrows his eyes with a slight grin.
"Hysteria? An indifferent murderer? You mean to say this madman killed those people purely to create a hysteria throughout London?"
And there you have it, Mr. Wiggins.
"But why? I don't believe it."
We come upon the why right at this very moment. The cab slows and we all exit at the water's edge. Holmes tosses payment to the driver and briskly moves towards the dock. You forget that it is the Thames itself where the murders have taken place. For plague hysteria in London, limitless locations could have been chosen, but instead, each and every case of this Red Death took place on the water. And this was your final clue. Holmes looks to his watch. And if this Red Death is as punctual as I believe it will be, he looks up and points. There! We follow his direction and to our shock and surprise see a thick red fog billowing in from nowhere. Have you solved it yet, Mr. Wiggins?
Hysteria on the Thames. Then the murderer isn't trying to get all of London in a fit, but only fishermen, or rather the boatmen on the Thames.
As we watch, a steamer comes chugging along towards the red fog. It slows as men aboard rush about pointing and screaming at it. The ship's alarm sounds as the fog creeps ever closer. We watch the vessel turn away from the fog, only to encounter another plume of red vapor, and another. Clouds of thick, expanding crimson cut off every route of escape save one. The ship finally turns and cuts across the river to the south. Now, Mr. Wiggins, take note of our very place and time. Recall the facts, and to prove me once again my faith in you as the astute detective I know you are. Wiggins looks to the water, watching the ship disappear across the Thames and the red fog giving chase. He dips his head down like a mathematician making an impossible calculation, but it looks as if poor Wiggins is lost until he freezes, then rises with a jolt.
I don't know the name of it, Holmes, but blow me down and tie me over if this isn't the Navy ship returning from the Boer War.
Bravo, Mr. Wiggins, bravo. A ship returning with the spoils of war, in diamonds and gold. A little fact my brother Mycroft Holmes confirmed with one of his Navy chaps. Wiggins stirs and leaps from the water's edge, waving wildly for a taxi.
We've got to get across with haste, Holmes. I know where it's heading, St. Saviour's Dock. I'm sure of it.
Such certainty can only come from deciphering the message sent from Dr. Wakely to the leaders of the pirate mercenaries, Will Cotton. I must admit it was a most rudimentary cipher encryption, the first letter of each word, then the second letter of each word from the second line, combined with the one static line. Tomorrow, St. Saviour's. A touch of panic creeps over Wiggins.
Right, Holmes, but there's no time for riddles. I have every reason to believe Wakely's men are waiting to take possession of the vessel and relieve it of its valuables.
Holmes can't help but chuckle. A ragtag band of mercenaries, paid for by funds leveraged on a loan on his own house through Barclays Bank, no doubt. But there's no cause for alarm, old man. I've already alerted Inspector Cray. They took the dock not an hour ago, and when Dr. Wakely rows into St. Saviour's, thinking the Navy ship is his for the taking, he'll find one of the largest contingents of London police ever mustered. Wiggins calms himself.
Then there was only one true crime this hour.
Oh? Asks Holmes, his face awash with genuine curiosity. What's that now, Mr. Wiggins?
The fact that we won't be there to see the look on Wakely's face when he's taken into custody.
We all have a laugh and look out across the Thames one last time. We watch as a number of police boats appear from hiding and converge on St. Saviour's, and with it closes another case of crime and murder on the Thames.